Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Killing Eve season 3, episodes 7 and 8. Let's talk about it. So we finally reached the end of season 3 of Killing Eve, and boy do I have a lot of thoughts about the last two episodes, especially episode 8. We're going to get into it for sure, but before we get started, I just want to warn you guys that this is going to be a spoiler review as per usual. And before we get into the review, if you could please make sure that you are subscribed to my channel so you can catch new uploads. Okay, so without further ado, let's just get right into this one because I don't want this video to be too long, but I have a lot to say. So first of all, for the most part, this video will be focused on the finale of this season, although I will be touching on what happened in episode 7 as well. And in terms of the finale overall, I have to say I was kind of disappointed. I was somewhat disappointed in the finale. Now, it wasn't because of the acting, the performances, anything of the sort. I think the performances in the finale were spectacular, amazing. We definitely focused a lot more on the emotions that were bubbling right underneath the surface for all of the characters throughout this season in this finale. And I think the actors did an excellent job of conveying those emotions. The characters were going through a lot mentally speaking, and it made for a very compelling performance to watch on screen, which I fully appreciated. However, when it comes to what was happening to the characters outside of their minds, oh boy, there wasn't much there, was there? I was so disappointed to see that so many of the questions that were raised throughout this season just were left completely unanswered. There is so much missing from everything that was set up throughout season 3 in this finale that it really did leave me quite baffled. Like, I was surprised to see just how stagnant the episode felt. And for the most part, I do think it was because throughout this season, I was waiting, I was anticipating something big to happen. And even though some of the episodes throughout this season were a little bit lackluster and disappointed me somewhat, I still had that hope that the season finale would just bring it all together, kind of how it did in season 2, which again wasn't the strongest season. Of course, season 1 being the strongest out of all 3 of them, but still the finale of season 2 felt like a finale. They were in Rome, everything was going on at once, the betrayal, the madness, like it was a pretty cool season finale for Killing Eve. But for season 3 to be so lackluster, like that was disappointing. That was surprising to me. And in order to illustrate my point fully, I really want to go through and explore the elements, the themes, and the questions that were left unanswered after having seen the season finale. So first off, one of the major events that we got in season 3 was of course the death of Kenny. And if you've been watching my reviews of Killing Eve season 3, you will know that I am heartbroken. I'm still in mourning. Don't mistake this yellow for happiness. I am still in mourning. Deep down, I'm wearing black. My soul is black because I am so upset about Kenny's death. But my personal feelings aside, let's fully evaluate this. Let's fully analyze the effect of Kenny's death on season 3. The most prominent effect that this had was of course on Carolyn and her mental state throughout this season. She was mourning her son and she wanted to find answers for what exactly happened to him. And in the finale, we find out through some very convenient hidden footage that Konstantin was somehow involved and he was interacting with Kenny in his final moments. Konstantin alleges that he was trying to tell Kenny to back off of his investigation of the 12, that it would get him hurt, but Kenny was afraid of him and he was backing up and he ended up falling off of that roof. Now, of course, Carolyn finds that extremely hard to believe, and because there is no other evidence to suggest otherwise, it becomes this very tense moment where she's holding a gun to Konstantin's head and demanding that he tells her the truth, but of course she will never know the truth for sure because there is no footage of that particular exchange. Now, in terms of Carolyn's character arc throughout this season, I do think that the finale presented a very good climax for that, because finally she's had enough. All of the emotions that she was trying to conceal and control have bubbled up to the surface and she is raving angry, at least in her version of being angry. And when she's pointing the gun at Konstantin's face and he is begging her not to do this, he's telling her that he loves her, which That's so emotionally manipulative, but whatever. He is using all of the cards that he has available in order to save himself in that moment. And God knows he's had a difficult day to begin with, but Carolyn isn't having it because all she is seeing is red. She is so angry because she hasn't been able to find the answers that she was looking for when it comes to her son's death. And one thing that the season finale also suggests is that Carolyn was never fully invested in taking down the 12. She was more invested in finding out what happened to her son and how he died and who did it, as opposed to finding out how she can break down this organization that seems to be all powerful. We see that in her interaction with Eve and Villanelle, where she's explaining to Eve that there was no way that they could stop the 12, and she even points out to Villanelle that she knows this deep down. She knows that this is an inevitability, that they would just continue to power through. And this is mere moments after she let Constantine go but decided to kill Paul at the very last minute. And we will talk about Paul in a second, but in terms of Carolyn's story arc, I do think that they did it justice, just in light of the fact that this season started off with the death of her son. If the question is whether or not Kenny's death actually supplemented Carolyn's story arc and her character development, I would say that it very much did. But my next question then becomes, was it really worth it to kill off such a lovable character just to have her story arc be somewhat better? I don't think it was. After having seen the finale, I just don't think that Kenny's death was warranted still. I was hopeful. I was waiting for Kenny's death to have felt warranted and necessary in order to move the plot surrounding the 12 along, so that we would find out more information about this mysterious and all-powerful organization that seems to be lurking in the background of everything that MI6 is trying to break down. And I fully believed initially that Kenny's death was going to be the driving force in order to get us more answers surrounding the 12 and this entire organization, but instead it ended up being a plot device in order to further the character of Carolyn. And I think that is such a shame, again, considering how great this character was and how much he did for the character of Eve, which we'll talk about literally in a second. But in terms of the character of Caroline, I do think that she benefited the most from the event of Kenny's death, even though it did feel overall quite wasted for this entire character to have been taken out from this show when nothing much really came of it in terms of finding out about the 12. Now let's get on to Eve, and I think one of the major reasons why Kenny was killed off in the first place was to provide her with some motivation in order to get back into work and get back into investigating the 12 and Villanelle and all of that. Considering how down and dour she was at the beginning of this season, and if you take into consideration how she ends up at the end of this season, which is a whole complex love story situation with Villanelle, I don't think that Kenny's death was once again necessary in order to establish that character arc. We definitely saw that she was more affected by Kenny's death in the beginning of this season, where she was mourning his death and she wanted to find answers and she was desperate to find those answers. But as the episodes went along, she became distracted by Villanelle and by everything that was going on over there, that Kenny's death just lost all of its impact and meaning when it came to the character of Eve and how it affected her. So then again, I asked myself, why bother even killing him? Because it didn't even serve a major purpose. Yes, she went back to work and tried to find out answers, but we could have used something else in order to drive that forward. And the main reason why I say that is because he was a large part of what made the character of Eve work on her own. I've said this once, I said this twice, I'll say it a million times again. When it comes to killing Eve, what we are looking for is the interaction between Villanelle and Eve together. And Villanelle on her own is also pretty awesome, but Eve on her own, not as much. I'm being honest. I'm sorry. She's just not as interesting. I'm sorry to say it. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but she needs a crutch. She needs someone else to be there in order for the dynamic to work with another character. And that character for the first 2 seasons was Kenny. And he was a great character for her to bounce off of. But now she was lacking that this season. And sure, her interactions with Carolyn and with Jamie and Bear were fine, but they were no substitute. They were no substitute for the friendship that she had developed with Kenny. And speaking of Villanelle, another major thing that we had throughout this season was the exploration of whether or not this character can leave the life of an assassin behind. Now we see that at the beginning of episode 8, where she's interacting with Carolyn in this really cool conversation. Truly, I think Carolyn's badass side really came out in episode 8, because we were starting to get little hints of it throughout this season with her cold war espionage antics, but we finally got a real look at the badass spy that Carolyn really is in episode 8, especially in that scene where she was holding that gun to Constantine's face and demanding that he tells her exactly what she wants to know. But anyways, we saw elements of this darker side of Carolyn at the beginning of episode 8 when she was talking to Eve and explaining to her very calmly that there is no use for someone like her. If she's not going to kill, then what on earth is she going to contribute? Because Eve is trying to find out if there is a job opportunity available for her if she was to leave this life behind, and Carolyn explains to her very calmly, very matter-of-factly that there isn't, because the skill that she has, what makes her so unique and valuable in the field, is the fact that she can kill people. And if that's something that she's not willing to be involved in anymore because she's having this crisis of conscience, then there is nothing more for her. She's going to have to find a way to like go to college or something and build a career that way. Although, having said that, if she leaves the 12 and doesn't end up in an organization like MI6, does she just end up with this huge rap sheet that gets her like 1,000 years in prison? But she's basically trapped because of her past and because she has nowhere to go in her future. And that's something that she's trying to explore at the end of this season. But unfortunately, she's realizing that she has very limited options available to her. Now, like I said, when it comes to the character of Villanelle, I enjoy seeing her going through her journey, even without the character of Eve, because I don't think that Eve is necessary in order to prop her up as a character. She's a very strong character on her own, and she was going through a lot of character development and an interesting character arc throughout this season. At the beginning, we saw that she was hungry for power. She wanted more autonomy and influence within the organization. She was tired of just being a footman, and so she sought that, and Dasha was trying to help her along with that, although she also had her own motives. But after realizing that the promotion that she wanted was nothing really different to what she was currently doing already, it kind of disillusioned her to the entire career path that she has. It made her realize that all of this time that she has spent killing and being a monster, who was it for? It wasn't for her. So it makes her realize that she wants something more out of her life, especially after feeling the guilt of killing her mother and some of her family members when she went back to Russia. And I do think that that was a watershed moment for this character. It was the first time when she had killed and actually felt guilt and regret. And I think that opened up the floodgates for more self-reflection and more self-analysis of what exactly she was doing with her life and the direction that she was headed towards. I think the show had the potential to create a very interesting parallel when it came to Villanelle and Dasha, but unfortunately they didn't take that route, because instead they end up killing off Dasha just randomly. Unfortunately, this character had so much potential. She could have shown Villanelle what happens to you when you lead this life, like nothing good. You end up dying alone, except her death is just a footnote in the entire finale, and it just feels like a wasted opportunity, because if Villanelle had fully processed the fact that this character, who was my mentor, who built me up to be this killing machine, ended up dying frail and old and alone in a hospital bed where no one cared about her or even knew that she was there, that maybe would have reinforced the idea that the path that she's headed towards is very similar to that of Dasha, and it's something that she wants to avoid at all costs. Now, this entire story arc that posits whether Villanelle is capable of living a regular old life culminates in the finale when we finally see a reunion between Eve and Villanelle, and they're dancing together and also having this deep discussion about whether or not they could even live a regular life, whether that would even bring them happiness or satisfaction. And Eve points out that they would probably end up killing each other, like they just wouldn't be able to handle that normality, because at the end of the day this entire relationship is fueled by death, it's fueled by espionage and deception, and so would they even be able to handle the mundaneness of ordinary life? And whilst Eve insists that they would probably consume each other, it seems like Villanelle is more open to the idea, even if it does end up in heartbreak and hardship. She's open to trying, I think, more than Eve is. And I think that's a really interesting twist, because it seems like Eve has fallen in love with the monster inside Villanelle rather than the whole of Villanelle herself. Also, I did appreciate their discussion, and I think their little sixth date, I don't know what number we're on at this point, I think it was really cute and sweet, but it was well overdue. This to be the only substantial reunion we got the entire season, after I've been banging on about how the best part of the show is when they're together, for us to only get them together in episode 8, like that's I mean, we had the kiss in like episode 4 or 5, I can't remember which one, on the bus when they were fighting together, and that was a little, you know, a little tidbit to get us going along for the next few episodes. But for us to be waiting until episode 8 for them to get back together, whilst I did enjoy the interactions that they had in this final episode, I do think that it felt way too long overdue and a little bit too little too late. However, I will say I did enjoy that little conversation that they had later on the bridge, when Villanelle tells Eve that if she wants to move on, it's as simple as them turning away from each other and walking away. But we see that they walk only a few paces until they both stop. Very nicely, symmetrically, I might add. Fully appreciated. I love me some symmetry. They both stop and end up turning around, which suggests that they have no intention of moving on from each other. And I hope that means that from season 4 onwards, we're going to be getting more of them together. And of course, another major theme that was explored throughout the season was that of family. And we saw this most obviously in the episode where Villanelle went back to her roots and met up with her family members in this touching reunion that saw the house being burned to a crisp with her mother inside of it. And that was of course the inciting incident that had her doing a little bit more self-reflection afterwards. We also saw this theme manifest in the relationship between Geraldine and Carolyn, where we saw that they are pretty much polar opposites to one another, where one is so much more empathetic than the other. And we saw that come to a head in the season finale, where Geraldine is reading out this list of issues that she has with her mother and things that she wants to tell her. And in response to this emotional heart-to-heart, Carolyn just picks up this diary with 2 blank pages and she just reads, "Go home." It's time for you to go home, Geraldine, because there is nothing for you here. What you are looking for isn't something that I'm able to give to you. And so that's kind of the end, at least it seems like it, the end of that whole storyline with her daughter. But again, I was slightly disappointed when it came to that entire storyline, because it just didn't feel very fulfilling. Her daughter did not present herself as an adequate replacement for Kenny in the slightest. She barely had a presence in this season. And another family dynamic that we were presented with is one that we have seen before, and that was between Konstantin and his daughter, his actual biological daughter, who Villanelle is not so secretly jealous of. But it turns out that Villanelle and his daughter have a lot more in common than we would have thought, because she ends up killing her mother's boyfriend in this horrific event where she is just driving over him again and again. And as a result, she ends up in this mental institution in Russia, which means that she's no longer part of the getaway plan that Konstantin has meticulously arranged for them so that they can get away from the 12 and live out their lives in Cuba. But once again, there were so many stones that were left unturned when it came to that whole storyline as well, because first of all, we never really got an understanding of why Konstantin had stolen the money from the 12 and why he wanted to leave. I mean, obviously for the obvious reasons of his job being dangerous and he was tired of it and blah blah blah, but we never actually got an understanding of why now. Like, why was he booking to leave now? And 2, we never actually followed up with his daughter. Last time we saw her, she was in that mental institution having a grand old time and Konstantin was insisting that he would be back for her in 2 days, and of course he ended up having that heart attack and he ended up having to go to the hospital, which he discharged himself from. Big mistake, because he clearly isn't ready to leave that hospital at that point. But yeah, we never really saw a follow-up to what happened, so I'm guessing we're gonna have to wait until season 4 to see what came of his daughter and his exit plan. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention Paul. That's kind of reflective of the way that this character was treated throughout this entire season. He was so irrelevant. He was so irrelevant. I truly believed, I don't know why, I truly believed that something interesting would come of this character, that he would be this interesting villain that's working for both sides, that he would end up being the link between Carolyn and her investigation and with the 12. But instead, the only thing that he really did was kill off Carolyn's assistant, which was unfortunate, but we weren't really invested in that character because I swear he was introduced like this season and I don't even remember his name. So it was sad, but it wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't something that is the 12 worthy. And then you have the fact that at the end, he ends up being shot by Carolyn anyway, because she quickly figures out that he is a double crosser. So I just, this character, missed opportunity, just entirely a missed opportunity. And it's even worse when you consider the fact that the show at one point wanted us to believe that Konstantin was afraid of this character. Konstantin was supposed to be afraid of Paul finding out about his exit plan and finding out about the fact that he had stolen money from the 12. Who would be afraid of Paul? Not me. I'm not afraid of Paul. So when it comes to my thoughts on Killing Eve season 3, for the most part they're mixed. On the one hand, I do enjoy the themes that they explore throughout this season. I definitely like the fact that we got a lot more insight and introspection into the characters of Villanelle and Carolyn. I liked the fact that we got to see Carolyn on the field a lot more this season and saw exactly why it is she has this incredible reputation. And I did enjoy seeing the characters of Villanelle and Constantine both start reflecting on their life choices and realizing that maybe a future in the 12 is not for them. But at the same time, whilst there were so many interesting themes and questions that were raised throughout the season, a lot of them went unanswered. A lot of them were kind of swept under the carpet rather unceremoniously, especially in the case of Paul, who was built up as this really interesting antagonist for Carolyn, but turned out to be nothing more than a footnote in the entire series. Then you also have this tag team of Jamie and Bear that was added to this season, and they were supposed to be off doing some investigation and finding out more about the 12, but they never really found anything substantial anyways. There was a lot of that happening basically, and I think it did diminish the quality of the season and the impact of it. It feels more like a whole filler season for what's to come for season 4. And whilst I am really interested to see the direction that Eve and Villanelle take in the next season, I do think that in building up season 4, they did season 3 a bit of a disservice. And as a result, I'm going to be giving season 3 of Killing Eve a 7.5 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on season 3 of Killing Eve, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.